Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Red Pill Diaries. I'm your host, your brother, and your friend, Rashid, and I'd like to thank each and every one of you for sharing your time with me because you did not have to do this. There are other things that you could have been doing. There's other places where you could have spent your time. There's other things that could have taken the place of you watching me, and I want to tell you all right now, right here, that I'm very thankful and humbled that you chose to come to the Red Pill Diaries. Now, as we await for Dimitri Lascaris to join us, I just hit him up to remind him again that we're live and we're waiting on him. But as we wait for him, we'll discuss a few topics. All right, live stream tomorrow on first of all on Patreon, I believe it is, and then the following day it is for channel members. We'll do a live stream, or it's vice versa. One of the two. I have to look at my itinerary, but one of the two. Anyway, the name of this show is Redo Live with Dimitri Lascaris, Middle Eastern Crisis, because we know that the first time some things came up and he had to redo some things because there was breaking events, breaking news in Palestine and in Syria and in Lebanon. So we'll wait for his presence. But we're going to still talk about the crisis in the Middle East. We're going to talk about a lot of things that are going on, which just so happened. I was thinking over a few things that was being said in the news yesterday on the alternative media news about the situation and how it's escalating. Now, remember, I hate to be the one that I told you so, but in reality, I told everybody this. Prior to this taking place, I told people a year ago, I told them 2 years ago, I told them 3 years ago that while everybody is so preoccupied with the possibility of war in the Caucasus or afterwards the outbreak of war in the Caucasus, that this will not yet escalate into a third world war in the Caucasus at this moment, because the primary war that is to take place is the Middle Eastern North African War, or the MENA War, the MENA region war. And I've been telling you that and telling you that and telling you that. And now look where we are. This is the main thing that everybody is talking about. But I was talking about it when it wasn't popular, when me as if I was crazy. And I kept telling you about the underground buildup of weaponry. I kept telling you about the U.S. injecting more troops, more weapons, more guns, more missiles, more radars, more infantry everywhere across the Middle East, because that's what I was being told. Because they were preparing for something major. Now listen, it does not take a rocket scientist to understand what is actually put into place. Most people say that Joe Biden is livid with Mr. Netanyahu, and they'll say that Israel wags America's tail, and America's the dog, and Israel is the boss. And I keep telling you that is not how it is. A lot of people don't understand. All right. He who controls the purse controls the policies. Okay. You can't implement it. You can't implement any sound policies, any rational policies, if you don't have the financial wherewithal to put them into action. So he who controls the purse strings controls the policy initiatives, okay? You see that every day in U.S. politics, how so much corruption is in the political system because you have all of these donors, all of these lobbyists injecting money, and then they write policies, give it to their bought and paid for legislator, and then they introduce these bills. These bills are voted on and they become law because of the introduction of so much money. And then after they're introduced, we say that the drug lobby or the lumber lobby or medical lobby or whatever wrote these laws and paid these politicians to vote on it. Well, I'm saying the same thing. Israel cannot do anything that Israel's doing outside of America. Remember, here's something never to lose sight of. The United States, the UK, and Israel are one in the same. And let me say that again. The United States, Israel, and the UK are one and the same. Dimitri is in the building. Now I got to bring my friend up on the screen. I'm so happy that he was able to join us today. Dimitri,
sorry, Rashid.
Dimitri, how are you doing today, Dimitri?
Good, Rashid. I'm sorry. I thought we were supposed to start an hour ago. You know, I'm in Greece, so I'm 7 hours ahead of you, and I got on the StreamYard for like 15 minutes, and I thought I was just confused. My apologies for being late. Anyways, good to see you. Pleasure to be here.
It's okay. Yeah, likewise, Dimitri. I have to ask you, what is now taking place in the Middle East? Because it seems like Israel is attacking with impunity. They're just spreading war everywhere, and the Western press is giving them a pass as if they're the victims and everybody else are the aggressors.
So I can't recommend enough, Rashid, to people who are listening to our conversation that they try to get as much information as they can from the other side of this war. And that's not to say that they should believe everything they hear from representatives of resistance groups. But you really can't even get a sense of what's happening without getting all of the information that's available and then using your own critical thinking with appropriate levels of skepticism to try to understand what's true and what's false. I spent 2 or 3 hours a day, and this has been going on for the entire duration of this genocide that started in October of last year, 2 or 3 hours a day reading statements being put out by resistance groups in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Syria, Yemen, and of course, above all, in Palestine. And what you said is absolutely correct, that there is a tremendous amount of violence being visited upon defenseless civilians. And Israel appears to be in the process of doing to southern Beirut what it was doing and continues to do to Gaza with total impunity, which is basically render it completely unlivable. But at the same time, there is combat going on, and you're not hearing about the losses that Israel is taking. You're not hearing about the damage to its economy, the number of soldiers who have been wounded, disabled, the number who have been killed. You're not hearing about the military bases that are being struck. You're not hearing about the fact that Israeli citizens in the north of the country, and now even as far away as Tel Aviv, are constantly having to go into bomb shelters because Israeli airspace is being penetrated. You're not hearing that Iran's missile attack was actually extremely effective in demonstrating that Iran can strike any target in Israel that it so chooses and destroy it. That's what that October 1st salvo or series of salvos of missiles clearly demonstrated. And there are independent military experts I've spoken to from the United States, numerous of them, who say this quite unambiguously. So there's a whole other story to this war. It's not just the human suffering on the Arab side that we're not being fully told about, but it's the military aspects of this war that are being neglected and misrepresented. And where this is all heading, of course, is not only will, in my opinion, and I've said this for quite some time, and a lot of other people are saying it too, you just won't hear about them in the mainstream media. This is not just heading towards a full-scale regional war, which could draw in Russia and China, particularly Russia, but it's also going to end up inevitably in the destruction of Israel. So that even if the only thing you care about is Israel, you don't care about all the children in Palestine and in Lebanon and Syria and elsewhere in Yemen, the pummeling Yemen is taken, none of that matters to you. All you care about is Israel. You should be putting as much pressure as possible on your government, wherever you live, to put a stop to this war now, because that's where it's going to end, in Israel's destruction.
You know, I have a different thought of most pundits when they talk about the escalation. I believe this was planned. And I'm not just talking about by Benjamin Netanyahu, because we know that he is a lunatic. But as I always tell people, that people who have the purse pull the strings. And there was no coincidence that leading up to these attacks, the assassination of Nasrallah and other leaders and stuff, the United States delivered over 100+ bunker busting bombs for that purpose. They reinforced their bases prior to the strikes. They sent up AWACS prior to the strike. They doubled down on troop movement across not just Palestine, but across the Middle East. This does not this does not say that you were not aware and that you weren't involved in the planning and the go ahead with what is going on. This shows me that you had more than a heads up on it, and maybe you were in on the planning and the activation of it. What says you about that situation?
I am in 100% agreement with you, Rashid. The only thing I will say is, there's been a lot of discussion about whether or not, in some sense, the October 7th attacks were a false flag. I've seen some people, not in the mainstream certainly, go so far as to say that the Israeli military, and there is evidence to support this, that the Israeli military and intelligence knew full well that Hamas was planning an attack of this nature. Not only did they not prepare for it, compromised the ability of the Israeli military to respond to it by sending troops into the West Bank, diverting them away from the border of Gaza. This is all true. But I don't think there's enough evidence to say that this was a false flag. Although there certainly is, at a bare minimum, a massive intelligence failure. But when you go beyond October 7th, right, and you talk about the US government's attitude to how Israel responded to the attacks on October 7th, how Israel responded to the attacks on its military bases by Hezbollah, how Israel responded to Yemen's attacks on Red Sea shipping, I think the evidence is overwhelming that the US government completely supports everything that Israel has done, 100%. Now, the only qualification I would offer is that we should remember, always bear in mind, that the US government is huge and it's not monolithic. Not everybody in the US government thinks the same way. And I'm sure that in this massive organization that we call the US government, there are people who are opposed vehemently to the genocide. Some of them have resigned. People have resigned from fairly influential positions in the US government because of their objections to the genocide. I think there are almost certainly people in the Pentagon who believe that the escalation of this war is a disastrous idea, in part because it will do irreparable harm to Israel. But the people who are the key decision makers, and by that I mean Joe Biden, Antony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, Victoria Nuland when she was there, Burns, the head of the CIA. To me, the evidence is overwhelming that these people support what Israel is doing. And there was, in fact, an article in Politico, which came out, a mainstream media organization, which about 2 weeks ago, I think it was, which said that although the Biden administration was saying publicly that it didn't want Israel to escalate the war in Lebanon, privately, the key decision makers in the administration were giving Israel the encouragement to go ahead and do it. And for all the reasons you mentioned, including those AWACS, all the steps, the preparatory steps that the US military took, for example, before they assassinated Nasrallah, which was an insanely provocative act, killing the Secretary General of Hezbollah, it all points to one conclusion, and that is the US, the people, the key decision makers, I underline that, want a major regional war. They think they can take out Iran's government. They think they can destroy Hezbollah. They think they can destroy the Palestinian resistance. They think they can destroy the Ansar Allah movement in Yemen all at once. They're delusional.
And it looks like a repeat play from when they invited General Soleimani to Iraq for so-called negotiations to come up with some type of plan to eradicate ISIS or Al-Qaeda. And then they pulled the same thing with Nasrallah. This is why I'm telling you that the United States, in public, she feigns to not know anything, but the playbook is exactly the same. So what do you say about the Americans who are denying that they had any knowledge, any foreknowledge, or any hand in the assassination, the planning, the intelligence, providing intelligence to Israel about Nasrallah, his crew, because that looks more like the way these operations were carried out. That looks like this was a CIA operation passed down to the Mossad.
Yeah, I can't believe for 1 second that Israel carried out. I think it's preposterous, it's laughable, it's comical to suggest that the Biden administration did not know and approve of the killing of Hassan Nasrallah. Well, you know, just on the basis of this alone, there's lots of reason for me to say that, but just think about this, okay? Israel is a tiny country surrounded by much larger countries with much larger resources, much larger populations, whose people are furious with Israel because of what Israel is doing to Palestinians and because of the aggression it has shown over decades towards Arabs, the indigenous peoples of this region, and particularly Muslims. They're furious. How does Israel get away with what it does? It gets away with what it does, and now, I mean, it's basically committed every imaginable atrocity with total impunity during the past year. How does it get away with it? It gets away with it because the United States government shields it from the consequences of its criminality, and other Western governments, but it's principally the US government. That's the one that has the most resources, military and economic and so forth, and uses them to defend and shield and support Israel. So what does this mean? This means that Israel is dependent upon the United States for its existence in its current form. Israel in its current form, which is to say an apartheid state, a rogue state, an aggressor, a congenital violator of the UN Charter, gets away with what it does because of the support from the United States. The United States has many interests in the Middle East, which are of tremendous value to the US elite and very important to the American people. And killing Nasrallah, you didn't have to be a rocket scientist to know that this was likely going to escalate the war dramatically and quite possibly bring Iran into it, which would have profound impacts on American interests in the region. So what the Biden administration asked us to believe is that this tiny little country that is completely dependent upon it for its survival right now did something that was going to have a profoundly negative impact on American interests in the region and didn't even give the Biden administration a heads up. This is ridiculous. It's laughable. The Biden administration knew and they assisted. And why are they doing this? So why are we getting this, what I call kabuki theater, which is to say that all the evidence, the hard objective evidence, suggests that the US government wants the war to escalate, but they keep telling us we're frustrated, you know, Netanyahu needs to rein it in. Biden keeps telling him, like this book just came out, I understand, by Bob Woodward, you know, the former Washington Post reporter who helped break the Watergate story, right? And in this book, I haven't read it, but I think it's bullocks. You know, it's like he says that Biden called Netanyahu a fucking liar. Excuse my French, okay? And he said that, you know, Netanyahu had no strategy. And Netanyahu was doing immense damage, and he blew his stack at Netanyahu. This is all kabuki theater. Why are they engaging in this kabuki theater? I think there's basically two reasons. The first is they're heading into an election, and they don't want the American people to believe that when the shit hits the fan, it basically has. Basically, the shit has hit the fan, but it's going to get potentially much worse. They don't want the American people to believe that they provoked it. They want the American people to be fooled into thinking that they reluctantly are coming to the defense of poor little Israel that is under siege by people who just have an irrational racist hatred of the Jewish people. They want the American people to believe that so they don't suffer the blowback at the ballot box, because the American people don't want this war. Most Americans do not want this war. Most people in the world don't want this war. You'd be crazy to want this war. The second reason is because the situation is very, very sensitive in the Middle East right now, and this is, you know, in parts of the region where the U.S. has managed to install a very subservient regime like Jordan or Egypt. Those governments upon which, you know, the U.S. vice grip on the region depends, who survive, you know, the U.S. ability to control the resources and trade routes of the Middle East depends upon the Jordanian king remaining in power, the Egyptian dictator remaining in power, the Saudis being on the American side. And so they are concerned that those regimes will be destabilized. They're already at a very, very delicate point. They're very fragile because of the anger in the region. So they're also trying to convince the indigenous peoples of West Asia that they aren't to blame. We're trying to stop all of this. But it's all kabuki theater, folks. This is crap. Don't believe it for 1 second. And I wouldn't recommend for 1 second that you buy Bob Woodward's book, because I believe it's probably based upon a bunch of sources who are lying to Woodward. And he's only too happy to tell this story that the U.S. is trying to stop Netanyahu. No, the U.S. wants this war. You're absolutely right.
And they've been wanting it for a long time. And there, like you said, there are elements in the government that's been wanting this war since the overthrow of the Shah. And you can tell it all throughout different administrations. The war hawks, the neoliberals, the neocons, even Dick Cheney once said that anyone, after they invaded Iraq, anyone can go to Baghdad, but real men go to Tehran. And they have been wanting, they see that as the crown jewel, because if they can get Iran and break Iran, they can have supremacy over the pipelines and the oil routes and everything, and it'll be right up under Russia's and China's underbelly. And I believe that is one of the main drivers that is pushing for this war. I want to play Dimitri. Dimitri, I got to play a disclaimer for a minute, because if I don't play a disclaimer, YouTube continues to act crazy. So let me play. It's a 15-second disclaimer that I need to play before I play any videos.
Sure.
All right.
That's a wise move,
right.
Rashid.
Now,
you don't want to piss off the YouTube masters. So.
Hey, I've already done it. I was looking at before. Everybody, hold on 1 second before I go to the clip. I was looking at the interview that I did with Scott of Calibrated yesterday, and YouTube says that it did like under 300 views, right? And so the exact same link is used in the Twitter. You know how you put a link in to the Twitter, and right now it has over 17,000 views, and YouTube says the video did under 300 views. It's crazy. Anyone that wants to see it, go to my Twitter page. They did it with Scott Ritter too. They did it with Larry Johnson. They did it with you. Every time they tell me my views are low, and then we go to the view counter and it's in the 10, 20, 30, 40,000. But hey, what can I say? But let me get to something. Israel recently, a lot of people in the Knesset, for those of you who do not know, that's the parliament in Israel, were demanding a nuclear strike on Palestine, on Lebanon, and especially on Iran. And in response, this is what came out today. I want you to listen to this. This is on Archie. So
a group of Iranian MPs have called on the country's Security Council to change the military doctrine. The move could potentially greenlight the creation of nuclear weapons. In Tehran, apparently, this is in response to growing threats from Israel.
At this time, when the evil usurping regime of Israel has harmed humanity and no international organization or European and American countries can control this rabid dog, as the representative of the people, I request the Supreme National Security Council of Iran to reconsider the military defense doctrine of the Islamic Republic of Iran on the agenda as soon as possible.
Well, let's learn more about this breaking news here on RT International. Crossing live to our correspondent, there he is, Mahdi Abbasian, for more details on this. Mahdi, Iran has always said its nuclear program is for peaceful public purposes, but now we have this. Can you take us through what it means in practice and why it seems to be happening?
Hi, Rory. Well, the person who you just saw was Mr. Akhlaqi Amiri. He is a member of the parliament, and today in an interview with Iranian media, he elaborated that by changing the military doctrine or the defense doctrine of Iran, actually he, alongside 38 other MPs, have signed a letter and sent it to the Supreme National Security Council of Iran, and they have basically asked the council to review the nuclear doctrine of Iran. They argue that based on the current circumstances and the looming threats of Israeli attack on Iran, Iran needs to improve its Iran needs to improve its deterrence power. And nuclear weapons, although being prohibited by Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, back in 2003, Ayatollah Khamenei clearly ordered a fatwa, which means a religious order that prohibits Iran from producing, storing, or using nuclear weapons. Now, while we have this argument and the National Security Council to decide to whether revise and review the nuclear doctrine or not, at the same time comes calls for this decision from the public. Today, the Tehran Times English newspaper in Iran, printed an article based on feedback from people, saying that there is a rising number of people in Iran who are calling for development of nuclear weapons to be used against Israel as a deterrent. Now, Iran has time and again clearly voiced that it does not have the intention or the plan to develop a military nuclear program. Otherwise, it's actually trying to have let's say, peaceful nuclear program for peaceful purposes. However, Western powers and Israel are accusing Iran of the opposite. But this kind of accusations, which have been, rejected by Iran time and again, the latest one actually was the Americans who actually approved this, that Iran does not have a military nuclear program. CIA director on Monday mentioned that Iran is not producing nuclear weapons, and if it wanted, the US and its allies would have understood, sooner. Now, the thing that we have right now is that we have to wait and see how the Iranian National Security Council, as the body that is in charge of, determining the security and defense policies of Iran, will decide to whether reconsider Iran's, development of nuclear weapons or not. Back to you.
All right, RT, is Mahdi Abbasian. Thank you.
Say about unintended consequences of the threat to use nuclear weapons against Iran and the threat to bomb Iran, after hearing what the legislators are all calling for now in Iran's change of doctrine?
There's so much to say about this, Rashid. I mean, the historical context is very important. It always is, and we should, first of all, I think, talk about that. Back in about 2003, this was at a point in time. I'm glad you mentioned Cheney, and that crowd, the neocon crowd from the Bush administration, because they clearly wanted war with Iran. But the criminal war of aggression on Iraq went so badly, which was foreseeable, that they had to at least shelve those plans for the time being. Now, I think it's very interesting that Dick Cheney endorsed Kamala Harris. Why would Dick Cheney endorse Kamala Harris? Dick Cheney hasn't changed. He hasn't suddenly become a peacenik. He endorsed Kamala Harris because he thinks that Kamala Harris will pursue the very policies that he wanted to pursue, and did to a large degree when he was, some would say, effectively controlling the Bush administration. But in any event, that's very telling. Now, at the time, however, part of the reason why this war against Iran, that Dick Cheney, that bloodthirsty warmonger, never got his wish, was because the CIA came out and said, I think it was 2003, that in fact the Iranians were not trying to develop a nuclear weapon. They effectively contradicted Netanyahu and the neocons in the Bush administration. And so let's fast forward then to the latter part of the Obama administration. The Obama administration enters into something called the JCPOA, which was a deal between the administration and the Iranian government, pursuant to which the Iranian government would submit to intensive surveillance of its nuclear program and accept various quite onerous restraints on the development of its civilian nuclear program in exchange for some sanctions relief, which have done enormous damage to the Iranian economy. So Trump comes to office, and by the way, as you may recall, Rashid, Netanyahu was pilloried. He just pilloried Obama for doing this deal, and so did Trump. Trump comes into office after promising that he was going to destroy the deal, and that's exactly what he did. He destroyed the deal. And just before he pulled the plug on the JCPOA, the International Atomic Energy Association confirmed that Iran was complying with the deal. Okay? So the other thing to bear in mind in terms of the historical context is that Israel is the only country in West Asia that has nukes, number one, and number two, is not a party to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which all the major nuclear powers are basically thumbing their nose at, by the way. But in any event, membership in that treaty requires you to accept various serious constraints on the development of your nuclear energy programs and to submit to various forms of inspection by the IAEA. All the countries in West Asia except Israel are part of that deal. So this is the context. And so what has the United States done by pulling out of the deal, which Iran was respecting, by constantly threatening Iran and allowing Israel to saber rattle and threaten Iran and attack Iran and kill its nuclear scientists and destroy its consulate in Damascus and murder its generals in Syria and its other military personnel in Syria, and by killing Soleimani, which, as you quite rightly mentioned, was an extremely dangerous and provocative act. Trump did that. It has given the Iranians all the incentive in the world to develop a nuke. They're pushing Iran to develop a nuke. Whether that's their intention or not, that is the effect of their policies, and it's obvious to anybody with half a brain that inevitably this is where we're going to end up. The Iranians have the capacity. Even Blinken himself, in July of this year, just before Netanyahu spoke to the U.S. Congress and got 58 standing ovations from these psychopaths in the U.S. Congress, said that Iran, in July, was 1 to 2 weeks away from developing nuclear weapons-grade material. Now, it still would have to develop a delivery system. Having the weapons grade uranium to fissile material to cause a nuclear explosion is one thing, but you have to have a system for delivering it. But the Iranians are very good with missile technology, as we've seen, and they're very close to the Russians. And the Russians are masters when it comes to nuclear weapons. They have the biggest nuclear stockpile in the world. It wouldn't take long for Iran to develop a delivery system. And it may already. There was I don't know if you're aware of this, but there was a seismic event in a desert in Iran. It's interesting that it happened in a desert where there isn't typically much. That part of Iran isn't typically earthquake prone. So out in the middle of a desert, at a depth I think of a few kilometers, there was a seismic event that registered, if I recall correctly, about 4.5 on the Richter scale. And I'm no seismologist. I don't have any expertise in this area, but I saw a seismic graph of the event, and it was like there was nothing. It was just flat, and all of a sudden, there was a jolt of seismic activity. I can't tell you whether or not that was a nuclear blast, an underground nuclear blast. It might have been, but it's very clear that that Iran can develop a bomb, and that the U.S. and Israel are incentivizing it to do so. The only other thing I want to say, Rashid, about this thing, I'm glad you showed me this because I actually wasn't aware of that. I wasn't aware that there are these 39 Iranian parliamentarians were publicly petitioning the supreme leader to revisit the nuclear doctrine of Iran. I suspect, I can't imagine that those 39 parliamentarians did that without coordination with the leadership of Iran, in particular the supreme leader. I think there was discussions internally. The Iranians are very, very as are all the resistance groups, frankly. They're very adept at managing escalation. So I think that they're saying, I don't know whether the Supreme Leader is ultimately going to change the doctrine, but I think what they're saying to the West is, you are playing with fire. You're playing with fire, and they're escalating, but in a way that's very wise. They aren't actually attacking anybody. What they're doing is they're getting 39 MPs to come out and say, let's develop a nuke. Will this cause Israel and the United States to reflect? There's no reason to believe that it will, but there's really no cost to Iran to doing it. Maybe somebody's going to talk sense to these people, and finally they'll get the message.
For everyone who's listening and watching, please hit the like button. Also, go and sign up to Dimitri Lascaris' page, also his channel. We also are experiencing little technical difficulties because of the weather changing, across the state of Florida or whatever, and about the big hurricane. So there may be a little buffering here and there that's out of our control. That is not even. Yeah, I'm in the panhandle. Oh,
man. I'm sorry, I didn't know that.
I'm like 40. Yeah. Yeah. So, Dimitri, I want to play something. I asked this question to Scott of Calibrated about, do you because this is Donald Trump, and a lot of people think that they're getting a different coin instead of a different side of the same coin between Trump and Kamala. Listen what he had to say about Israel's action and what Israel should do, because this is like extreme.
I listened to Biden yesterday. Since I went under the wing, I used to go under the wing of the aircraft. Nobody ever did that before. I did. All of a sudden, Biden started, but he only takes like a half a question. Usually can't answer it. But they asked him, "What do you think about Iran? Would you hit Iran?" And he goes, "As long as they don't hit the nuclear stuff." That's the thing you want to hit, right? I said, I think he's got that one wrong. Isn't that what you're supposed to hit? I mean, it's the biggest risk we have. Nuclear weapons, the power of nuclear weapons, the power of weaponry. I rebuilt the entire military, jets, everything. I built it, including nuclear, and I hated to build the nuclear, but I got to know firsthand the power of that stuff, and I'll tell you what, we have to be totally prepared. We have to be absolutely prepared. But when they asked him that question, the answer should have been, hit the nuclear first and worry about the rest later. And that's where they should.
Hit the nuclear stuff first and worry about the rest later.
Yeah. Well,
what have you to say on that?
The lunacy, the lunacy of this man. If he's so concerned about the nuclear, then why did he destroy a deal that the IAEA certified Iran was respecting? The easiest way to have prevented Iran from developing a nuke was A, keep that deal in place, keep ensuring that Iran is respecting the deal, which it did, and B, stop threatening Iran. But he did exactly the opposite. He not only destroyed the deal that Iran was respecting, he murdered Iran's top general, who was on a peace mission to Iraq, and took out a number of members of the Iraqi military in the process, and violated Iraqi sovereignty by executing this assassination on Iraqi territory. So everything that Donald Trump did when he was in power was maximizing the likelihood that Iran would develop a nuke. And now he's sitting there telling the American people, I'm the guy who's going to prevent Iran from developing a nuke. Absolute and utter lunacy. At the end of the day, though, I'll say this about Donald Trump. I think he's being honest. I think he probably will authorize the U.S. military to strike Iran's nuclear facilities, and which is going to ignite a conflagration unlike any the West Asia has ever seen, and cause immense damage to the global economy and end in Israel's destruction. I think he probably will do that. Whereas the Biden administration is lying. There are people in the Biden administration, I think, who agree with Donald Trump. They want Israel, with the assistance of the United States, to attack Iran's nuclear facilities. And they're telling the public that they're trying to de-escalate the situation. So at least Donald Trump is more honest about his psychopathic behavior.
Since we're on Trump, before we transition to the fallout from the bombings, I want to play the exclaimer one more time because YouTube, they're just something else. Let me play the exclaimer again.
And by the way, Rashid, while you're playing the disclaimer, I just wanted to tell you that I've only got about 8 minutes left. I've got at 10 minutes to the hour. I've got another meeting I have to go to, unfortunately.
Okay. I want to play this real quick. I won't play the whole thing. It's 59 seconds. It goes back to something you just said. So listen.
The Iran deal is defective at its core. If we do nothing, we know exactly what will happen. In just a short period of time, the world's leading state sponsor of terror will be on the cusp of acquiring the world's most dangerous weapons. At the heart of the Iran deal was a giant fiction that a murderous regime desired only a peaceful nuclear energy program. Therefore, I am announcing today that the United States will withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal. We will not allow a regime the chance.
That goes back to what you said. So could you put that in the perspective of the announcement that they should bomb the nukes, the nuclear installations, and the explosiveness of violence that would entail that if they did so?
That speech was given, the U.S. withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal in May 2018, okay? That is a little less than 6.5 years ago. He probably gave that speech, I think he gave that speech around that time. It certainly wasn't later than May 2018. It might have even been further back in time. Now, what did he say over and over again in that mendacious, incredibly dishonest and idiotic speech? That Iran is on the cusp of getting a nuke. That's what he said. So if he was telling the truth, and that in fact was both Iran's capability and intention, Iran must have nukes by now. On the cusp, they're just a week away. We've been hearing forever, they're a week away. So either they have nukes or these people are lying to you, okay? It's one or the other. They can't both be true. He said in May 2018, they're about to get a nuke. So where are the nukes? Where are the nukes? We're now 6.5. The man is lying through his teeth. They are all lying through their teeth. He's at least telling the truth in that he is announcing to the whole world that if he becomes the president, he's going to authorize an attempt, which will probably fail, to destroy Iran's nuclear facilities. But how can any sane person believe that this man is telling the truth about his motivation for wanting to attack Iran? Has nothing to do. They're actually trying, it seems everything they're doing is designed to maximize, as I said, Iran's incentive for developing nuclear weapons. So that can't be the reason. Can't be the reason why they want to attack Iran. The reason why they want to attack Iran, Rashid, is what you said at the very outset of our conversation today. They want to control the resources of the region. The pipelines, the gas, the oil, the trade routes. They want to dominate it all. That's what this is about. And they are incentivizing Iran to get nukes at our great risk, our existential risk, so that they can achieve their real objective. That's what's going on.
Business. Thank you so much, Dimitri. We'll get back and do another show at a later time, man. Be blessed. I'm really thankful and I'm grateful for your presence, man.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate it. And again, stay safe out there. I understand that's a nasty hurricane coming your way.
All right, my brother. Stay safe. Everybody, listen, we're not off the air yet. We're not up there yet. We have Dimitri on. He's leaving, but we're not up there. I want to show you guys something, okay, that Dimitri and I were just talking about. So give me 1 second to bring it up on the screen real quick. All right, let's see. Screen. Share screen. Share screen. Hold on 1 second, everybody. All right. It should be coming up. All right, share. Okay. It should be coming up on your screen right now. Hold on one. And it may be buffering a little bit because of the weather outside. Hopefully everything will be fine. Hold on. Let me see. Refresh that. So I'm taking you to the Twitter page real quick. I want to show you something. Just to let you know that we're not lying. All right. All right, it should be coming up now. All right. There we are. Okay, let's see if it pulls up on the screen. All right. If you look right here where it says Red Pill Diary, the Red Pill Diaries, 903 posts. Right up under that, it says youtube.com. It says live with Scott of Calibrated. All right. Live with Scott of Calibrated. That is the show we did Monday. Look, 17,000 impressions. Okay. Now I put that up there for a reason. Because you want to be honest, I want to show you exactly what YouTube says. This and this goes back to the censoring, okay, and then taking people out of search engines. So give me a second. I gotta go to the channel. Hold on, channel. YouTube says that show did 261, but the same link used to get to YouTube to view the channel off of Twitter or X says 17,000 people watched. That's a big difference in it. 17,000 versus 261, right? This is what I'm telling you. They are scared of shows that show you and go into the depths of what's going on. They're scared of alternative views. I was always taught that if your argument is sound, have to worry about the lies, because even at the beginning, when people believe the lies, after a while, when everything settles, the truth will stand. So when you see these people up in arms and censoring everybody and deplatforming everybody, it's because they have no sound argument, no sound judgment, no sound or rational policies, and any sound doctrine, any sound policies. House that they built, this illusion of democracy and freedom and capitalism. So this is what has them frightened to death. As a matter of fact, they are so frightened. I want to play you something, okay? This is crazy because this is straight from the page. And I've told you that they're all right. They're trying to silence everybody. Listen to Hillary Clinton. Listen to these people try to rationalize censorship. Look at these people, and I want you to think about where they're doing this at. In a nation that has touted freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of thought, right? In a nation that is always trying to set itself up as the beacon of hope and light. And that exceptional nation is actually tearing down the foundation of their freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, their constitution and their Bill of Rights by trying to dumb down the masses and then make it palatable for the masses to accept the madness that they're imposing upon the madness. Just listen to this. This is about 3 or 4 minutes. I want you to listen to how they try to rationalize taking what they said were your inherent rights, okay? Just what I want you to look. This shows you the depths of insanity of these people.
It's really hard to govern today. People go and people self-select where they go for their news or for their information. And then you just get into a vicious cycle. So it's really, really hard, much harder to build consensus today than at any time in the 45, 50 years I've been involved in this. Our First Amendment stands as a major block to the ability to be able to just, hammer it out of existence. So what we need is to win the ground, win the right to govern by hopefully having, winning enough votes that you're free to be able to implement change.
Kerry's controversial remark at the World Economic Forum sparked online outrage, ranging from disbelief to anger over controlling the narrative. Another former top diplomat, Hillary Clinton, goes even further, suggesting some Americans should be charged for what she calls parroting Russian propaganda.
Russia Today, RT, is an arm of the Russian government, an arm of its intelligence operation. It's basically an extension of their spying efforts. They are using Americans, both those who are witting and willing and those who are unwitting. Republicans go to the floor of the Congress and they parrot Russian talking points. So I think it's important to indict the Russians, but I also think there are Americans who are engaged in this kind of propaganda. And whether they should be civilly or even in some cases criminally charged is something that would be a better deterrence.
Some comments reacting to the Kerry and Clinton calls that seem to censor speech also noted the downfall of mainstream media. They echo the Wall Street Journal editor-in-chief who said news organizations have lost the clout they used to have.
If you go back really not that long ago, as I say, we owned the news. We were the gatekeepers, and we very much owned the facts as well. If it said it in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, then that was a fact. Nowadays, people can go to all sorts of different sources for the news, and they're much more questioning about what we're saying. So it's no longer good enough for us just to say, this is what happened, or this is the news. We have to explain our working. So readers expect to understand how we source stories. They want to know how we go about getting stories. We have to sort of lift the bonnet, as it were, and in a way that newspapers, aren't used to doing, and explain to people what we're doing. We need to be much more transparent about how we go about collecting the news.
Former New York University professor and author of Google Archipelago, Michael Rechtenwald, compares the US government's heading down a path to control the information flow to an Orwellian Ministry of Truth.
Kerry was suggesting is that if Kamala Harris is elected or installed, that in fact she would see to it that our First Amendment rights are completely annihilated. It's underscoring the hypocrisy of the regime that would have a complete control over information and the call for effective censorship and narrative control. This means that they don't trust the American people to have an opinion on anything, and they want to make sure that those opinions align with the regime's imperatives and dictates. So we're headed towards where the UK is right now, effectively making, posting memes or posting opinions on political issues that the regime does not want you to hold, making that illegal. They want to be the final arbiters of what counts as fact. And if they can't be the final arbiters of what counts as fact, then they need to censor people that have alternative views or that see the facts in a different light or in terms of a different narrative. They do not want the ownership of facts to pass out of their possession. This is the Ministry of Truth in Orwell's 1984. That's what these people aspire to be.
So, as I continue to tell you that this is Orwellian, right? It's amazing he said that at the end because I didn't actually hear that part. But I want to go to a few things to show you just where we are, okay? Now, Kerry talked about the First Amendment being an inconvenient roadblock, right, to what the government wants to do. Man, think about what he said. It was an inconvenient roadblock. These are the same people who, when they want to be patriotic and get you on their side, they trumpet the First Amendment. They trumpet the Bill of Elections and having sit downs with think tanks talking about removing the Bill of Rights and changing their constitution. Do you see how Orwellian this is? Up is down, down is up, in is out, out is in. I call it Bizarro world, because Bizarro is the upside down or the backwards Superman, and so is his world. This is what they're talking about. But let's go to something real quick. We got to do a little definition. It's definition time, okay? All right. So, according to Google gives us an AI overview of the First Amendment. In the First Amendment, we're only going to read two of the things because I want to go to something else. It says the First Amendment of the United States Constitution protects the following freedoms. Let me say that again. The First Amendment of the United States Constitution protects the following freedoms. Now, if they are not protected, right, then that means that the people who are advocating censorship and imprisonment of people and to take away first the right to speech and protest and assembly is attacking the very Constitution that they claim to want to protect, right? I'm serious, right? So listen what it says. The First Amendment of the United States Constitution protects the following freedoms. Number one, freedom of speech. That's number one. Let's do that again. Freedom of speech. The right to speak, not speak, or use certain words or phrases to express political views. However, listen to what it says right here. However, the government can prohibit speech that incites violence or breaches the peace. So they can turn or deem anything as what? According to the AI. The hate speech. Isn't that what YouTube and the censors are doing? Anything that you don't go, if you don't go along to get along, you become a violent threat, or you have to be deplatformed, demonetized, censored, taken out of the algorithm, taken out of the search engine, all of that stuff, because you are voicing the thoughts that everybody else may want to voice, but they have no platform or no way to get it out. So if the censors believe that if they can get you out of the way, then they can continue on with this march into straight madness. Let's go a little further. Number two, freedom of the press, the right to express oneself through publication and dissemination. The press does not have special rights or privileges that are not available to citizens in general. So all of the rights afforded to the press are afforded to YouTubers, people who are on other platforms like Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute, and all the rest of them. This same right is supposed to be afforded to and guaranteed to each and every one of you, yet they spit in the face of that with the deplatforming and decensoring and censoring people. Let's go to something else. He says that the First Amendment was a uncomfortable or block, right? Excuse me. And let's look at these words. I want you to pay close attention because this is Google. And we're going to go to the third definition of it, which is a verb, to block, all right? Because the words in that definition means what we're talking about. And it says verb, make the movement or flow in a passage, pipe, roll, etc., difficult or impossible. And it says to block up, to clog up, to choke, to stop up, to plug, to obstruct, to gum up, to occlude. So Kerry was essentially saying that the truth is clogging up their plans to dehumanize you, to dumb down you, to exploit you. And it is being done with the help of what they call the First Amendment, right? So the best thing to do is remove the First Amendment, right? or to water it down or to dumb it down, and then they can go further in bizarro land. Is that not right? Am I embellishing anything? Am I taking anything out of its context? That's why I give you definitions, so that no one can say that. So the guy at the end of the clip, he called this Orwellian, like I often say. Well, according to Orwellian, which is a break from Orwell himself, George Orwell, who did that book, 1984, you ought to read it. It says, meaning of Orwellian in English. And everybody who's listening, please forgive me if you hear the country that's come out. I'm just a country boy. I'm in the South. I'm a country boy. And so you'll hear that. But look over that and look into what I'm saying, because that's more important. So listen, it says, meaning of Orwellian in English, used to describe a political system in which the government tries to control every part of people's lives, similar to that described in the novel 1984 by George Orwell. Now, tell me if that's not the truth. Aren't they trying to control every aspect of your life? Aren't they in your bedroom trying to dictate to you what you can and can't do? What constitutes being a freak is, and what constitutes being a pedophile, and what constitutes this, and they have different standards here and different standards there, so that they can use them whenever they want to. If there's no coherent standard, then they can use whatever they want to use against you whenever they want to use it, because they have already set precedents for it. Orwellian. And then you become the terrorist, you become the fascist, you become the dictator, you become the terrorist, you become a disgruntled American, you become a threat to democracy, and you become a threat to the empire. Because, see, these code words, they like to use this because they don't think that you're wise enough to study. They don't think that you're wise enough to comprehend this. So they put it out there. You heard what Clinton and Kerry said? Who would have openly spoken like that 20 years ago or 30 years ago as a politician? Who would have done it? But they feel that they have dumbed down the masses enough, that they have taken over more of the institutions. And now they box themselves up into multiple desperate situations. The economy is collapsing. The political system is collapsing. The world order is collapsing. Their financial reign of terror around the globe is coming to an end. And militarily, not only do they have rivals, but they have, in certain instances, nations that surpass them in certain technologies. All of these are whammies being put on the back of the empire. So we see crisis after crisis, crime after crime being committed by America and our allies, and none of them are guilty of crime. Everything that they do is benign, benevolent, and is done with a righteous thought and a righteous demeanor, even as they bomb weddings, even as they occupy a third of Syria, even as they steal the oil, the gas, the wheat, the corn, and all of the products out of that third part of Syria, even as they armed and gave the green light and fed the intelligence to the Israeli armed forces to bomb Nasrallah, to bomb all across Lebanon, to bomb all across occupied Palestine, to bomb the capital of Syria, which is Damascus, to assassinate resistance leaders, to assassinate government officials, to assassinate political officials, to assassinate generals and colonels of the IRGC, the Syrian Arab Republic, the Lebanese resistance, the Lebanese armed forces, the Iraqi resistance, the Iraqi armed forces. And in every instance, in every case, America, the UK, NATO gives justification, and they are never the terrorists. It is the people who reside in those lands who are bombed, who are fighting for the resistance against occupation and domination. Those are the insurgents. Those are the terrorists. Those are the Islamists. Those are the extremists. Never the West. We never look at in the mirror and say, hold on. Wait a second. Maybe it's this policy of trying to steal that oil over there and set up military bases over there. Maybe that is what's driving these people mad. Maybe, hold on, let's sit down. Maybe our assassination of their leaders and installing dictators in the country before, maybe they have a right grievance with us. No, it is doubling and tripling down on failure. Yeah, we did it. We failed here, but what we'll do, we'll inject more money there. We'll find some more dissatisfied people and offer them power if they work with us. This has proven to be a losing policy, and yet they continue to try to force this policy on everybody. And then they don't believe in blowback. They don't believe that what goes around comes around. See, they can give it out, they can dish it out, but when it comes back as a buffet, they can't stomach it, they can't eat it. It's always, they're all against our freedoms. They're against our lifestyle. Hell, it seems to me that you're against theirs because you won't leave these people countries. You won't leave them alone. You tell us that you have the most powerful military in the world. You tell us that you have the best nuclear weapon in the world. You tell us that you have the best intelligence apparatus in the world. Then why the hell must you maintain thousands of military bases illegally and legally across the world? Because if the nuclear deterrence is not enough, then scrap the nuclear weapons. If the military that you say is bar none, number one, is no longer that, then how about you go and discuss policies that can revamp your military instead of having them in far-off lands? You can't do that because you need them in those lands to cause chaos, to cause misery, to cause dissatisfaction, and above all, to cause disillusionment, because with those things, you can then implement your policies of resource domination or trade route domination. That's what you want. You do it everywhere. And you want us to own when you get slapped in the face, when you get stabbed, or when you get juked, or when you get scratched or kicked. What do you think the victim will do? Allow you to rape them? What do you think the victim will do? Will continue to allow you to manhandle their wives and their children? Any man, woman, or child watching this understands that in real life, if that were to happen to you, what would you do? You would defend your family like hell. Then why can't we apply that in real time? Why must it always be them? It comes a time, I remember doing a lot of running the streets as a teenager. And my mom told me one time, it comes a time when you got to start looking at yourself as to blame. If every time you do this and you're with that person, it's not on those people. You have enough common sense. You got to do self-reflection. And it wasn't that clean when she said it to me. It was almost like 2 fists to the stomach, a couple to the jaw, and then self-reflect. It was like that. So she had her rocky moments on me when I got out of line. You understand what I'm saying? So listen, and sometimes that is needed. Sometimes that is needed. And when will it be a reflection moment for the empire? Will it be when she has alienated the entire world and they turn their back on her and she needs them to buy her debt, which is vastly quickly approaching, right? Will it be when there's an uprising within our own border and you have revolution and insurrection? Will that be the reflection point? Will that be when nations unify and push her out of the MENA region, or push her out of the Asia Pacific region, or push her out of the Eurasian region? When those epiphanies happen, if they were to happen at those points in time, then it would be too late for self-reflection, because the power of the empire would collapse. The time for self-reflection is now. Make amends for the dirt that you've done. Don't just say you're sorry. Prove you're sorry. Whenever you are in trouble, whenever you've committed a crime or been accused of committing a crime, the judge wants to see if you have any contrition in your heart. If you truly have reflected on the pain and misery that you've caused others. And if you have shown some type of remorse, some type of honesty, some type of reflection in a way of showing that I know I was wrong, and if I had the chance to do it again, I would do X, Y, and Z. So what they do, they ask you after you apologize to pay restitution. America refuses to pay restitution. There cannot be any healing. There cannot be any moving forward to things if you have raped, pillaged, robbed, and exploited, and there is no restitution behind it. I'm sorry doesn't get it. Because you can go out and kill and say, I'm sorry, and kill again, I'm sorry, and rape again, I'm sorry. If there's no tangible action behind that, your sorriness goes for nothing. So when will we see that with the Western world? When will we see it? Because we're not seeing it now. Look at what's going on in Palestine. As I said to you all, everybody's talking about Israel. I told you that sources told me that information about Nasrallah and his command center and that information about those other heads were given to Israeli intelligence by the US and the UK. I told you that. I told you that in a Patreon. Long before anybody stated anything, I told you that on a Patreon video or on a channel member stream video. I told you what a few people told me. I told you that this was no accident, and America had more than just a little bit of a hand in it. There was no way that she started transferring bunker buster bombs there. And all of the things that Israel we see now has used in Lebanon and in Syria. These things were not used in Gaza on the scale that they're being used in Lebanon. So there was a plan to use them at the right time in Lebanon. First, they wanted to destroy Gaza and the West Bank. Just put them into misery and pain. So then they can hit Hezbollah. These are strategic pickoffs, everybody. Listen to what I'm saying to you. Strategic pickoffs. Okay? These are strategic pickoffs. What do I mean? All right, I'll tell you. Before the war with Russia, this proxy war in Ukraine, America and NATO did a lot of strategic pickoffs. And what I mean by that is this. The nations that they hit. Remember Wesley Clark, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander and former presidential candidate for the Democratic Party, General Wesley Clark, the man who almost pushed the world to a nuclear war by demanding that NATO bomb Russian troops in Serbia and Kosovo. And the British General Sir Michael Jackson said, "You crazy as hell if you think I'm going to obey that order." Go Google what I'm saying, everybody. See if I'm lying to you. Well, Mr. Clark said that America was to bomb 7 nations in 5 years. And it's ironic that every one of those nations had trade relations with Russia. Every one of them. You think that's a coincidence? And remember when this took place, Russia was reeling still economically from the disillusionment of the Soviet Union. So to pick off Libya or to pick off Syria or to pick off Somalia or to pick off these other nations that they hit, this would not only hit Russia economically because of the trade, it would also hit it economically and militarily because these were nations that also bought Russian arms. So it would do a 2-factor hit. It would hit the economy and it would hit the military industrial complex economy. To hit all of these nations. These were strategic pickoffs. You understand what I'm saying? These things, hold on 1 second, everybody. Give me 1 second. I got it. Hold on 1 second. I'm having problems with my audio. Let me play a little short clip real quick and fix the audio real quick. Everybody, I want to apologize. This is about let me play a short minute clip. God, I hate that echoing. Oh my God. Hold on 1 second.
Look, it goes beyond these things. That just today, Brazil, in our hemisphere, largest country in the Western Hemisphere south of us, cut a trade deal with China. They're going to, from now on, do trade in their own currencies, get right around the dollar. They're creating a secondary economy in the world, totally independent of the United States. We won't have to talk about sanctions in 5 years because there'll be so many countries transacting in currencies other than the dollar that we won't have the ability to sanction them.
Now, this drive toward de-dollarization that we see led by countries like China and Brazil is angering the United States. And a clear example of this was the neoconservative Republican Senator Marco Rubio from Florida. When he heard about the news of China and Brazil de-dollarizing their trade and using their local currencies, Marco Rubio was furious. And on Fox News, he complained that if countries drop the dollar, the U.S. will no longer be able to sanction them. That's a very revealing quote because it's really a U.S. official admitting that by maintaining the dominance of the US dollar around the world, the United States is able to weaponize its currency and turn it into a geopolitical tool to attack any country that carries out policies that Washington doesn't like. So the US has imposed sanctions on countries that represent 1/4 of the global population, including China, Russia, Iran, Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, Zimbabwe, Syria. There are so many people living under brutal sanctions that prevent them from doing trade, prevent them from exporting, that cause massive economic problems and inflation at home and a lack of certain goods, a lack of medicines and technology. So this explains why countries around the world are looking for alternatives to the US dollar.
I just let that play. I was done about 30, 40 seconds ago, but I just let that play. I want to go back to the strategic pickoffs. See, when America started overthrowing those countries, she immediately turned their trade back to dollars. All right. Look at what happened in Iraq. Even though Iraq was making a killing hand over foot, as it started selling oil in the euro, right? As soon as America secured the oil fields, bombed Baghdad and the rest of them, and they took over the country, the first thing they did was transfer the selling of Iraqi oil, which is not their prerogative. They transferred the selling of Iraqi oil back into dollars, causing a huge loss of billions of dollars for the Iraqi economy. Nobody talks about that. Nobody talks about that. So, but here's another kicker. So the Soviet weapons or the Russian weapons that were being used at the time were being replaced by the U.S. through their proxies that they appointed in the Iraqi parliament. And so they would be buying U.S. weapons. And this is what happens. The U.S., when she occupies, that's what she does. So this is a boom for the military industrial complex of the West. And think about just buying them. Then you have to pay to train. Then you have to pay for the upgrades. You have to pay for the maintenance. So they are, first they took over the economy. Then they took over the military economy and the military industrial complex of those nations, pushing Russia out to the periphery. One nation at a time to siphon off more resources for the blood-sucking empire. That's what happens. So when I was telling you about picking these nations off, that's what I'm talking about, little bit by little bit. That's what is happening in West Asia, or what they call the Middle East. From Rafik Hariri being assassinated, he was a useful tool for the West until he wasn't, and he was assassinated. And that was the turning point. The United States, France, Great Britain, Germany, all of them pushed a propaganda campaign to say that it was Syria that was destabilizing Lebanon and ignoring the sovereignty of Lebanon, even though the Lebanese people wanted the Syrian forces there as a buffer against Israel aggression. So after putting so much pressure on Syria, Syrian forces pulled out of Lebanon. What happened? Israeli warplanes can fly freely in Lebanon and bomb at will. They can even bomb Syrian territory from Lebanese airspace. Right? So then they had an influx of terrorists coming from the Jordanian border, from the eastern going west in Syria. They had them coming down from Turkey up into Syria, which is the north-south. They had them on the border with occupied Palestine and Lebanon, and the border of occupied Palestine and Syria, to weaken Syria. And they wanted to eradicate Hamas. That's why they fought that war years ago, to eradicate Hamas, and they failed. And they wanted to eradicate Hezbollah. So what the United States did, they used the same playbook that Donald Trump did. Invite the leader of the opposition to come and have talks, to pretend as if you sincerely want talks, so that you can gain crucial intelligence of their whereabouts, their entourage, and who would be at the meeting, so that when you do strike, you can almost decapitate the leadership. That is the same playbook they used with Soleimani, when they not only killed Soleimani, but they killed a couple of his lieutenant colonels and a general of the Iraqi armed forces and some of his staff. Isn't that something? Did the exact same thing. Gained the intelligence. You already put into place the bunker busting bombs. Why? Israel is the size of the state of New Jersey, this big. Why would you transfer 120 to 150 bunker busting bombs to a nation like that unless you were planning for something very major and very strategic? And what did they use? Over 80 bombs just to get Nasrallah and his crew? They just used more? You think that's an accident? You think that this was not planned before the transfer of the bunker busting bombs? If that is the case, if you believe that, then I think that you may believe that Russia invaded Ukraine unprovoked. People sometimes, if it quacks like a duck, if it swims like a duck, if it's shaped like a duck, then probably it's a duck. And I know these are things that you don't want to see or hear because it has put your government or your ideas in a different light. But what I'm telling you is that the empire is against peace and security. You don't believe me? She's been at war for almost 230 years of her 240 some years in existence. That's not the war maker. What does it constitute? What will it take to constitute a war maker? If you have been at war 90+% of your existence, you invest more money in bombs, research and development, weapons. You can always find money for that. But for your veterans, you leave them in the cold out on the street after trumpeting patriotism. You leave them where they can barely afford to get medicine or food. Hell, the way I look at it is this. If you served your country, right? If you want, and I'm not one who was in the military, but I have uncles, my niece, my brothers, everybody. But listen, I think that a home should be guaranteed to you. You were willing to give your life up. So if you're so patriotic, U.S. government, how about you guarantee them a home? How about you give them basic universal rights? You telling me that their lives, their sacrifice is not worth that? But you can guarantee the pensions of Ukraine, the retirement of Ukraine, not just the military, not just the government, but civil society. The United States is paying their pensions. Did you know that? Huh? While the people are still suffering from the previous hurricane with no food, no shelter, no nothing. And FEMA screaming to the top of their lungs that after the month of October, we will no longer have any funds. And 2 days later, they passed an appropriation bill to give Israel an extra almost $9 billion. If that is not a spit in the face to those who are hit by disasters, if that is not a spit in the face to veterans who have to go and get food stamps after serving the country. This is the unraveling and the unwinding of American empire. This is the disillusionment and the collapse of Western hegemony. Because when you neglect the people who went to war with, and they can barely find anything to eat, and they're looking at the freedoms that they once had, and they're looking at all of the things that they once enjoyed, and they come home after being trained for war, trained to kill, and they have to go and sell cans and scrap metal and everything else to keep a roof over their children's head, or they have to sleep in cars. Do you not see that this is a recipe for a war at home then? America is faced with the greatest epidemic, the greatest problem that she has ever faced, and that's finding employment for her armed forces who come back from all of these tours of duty to find mental nourishment for these people who have been hurt by what they saw and what they were forced to do. Do you not know that you are imploding the home front by neglecting that? By neglecting that. You have more sympathy, more compassion for Ukraine. You have more desire for democracy, quote unquote, in the Republic of Georgia, in Armenia, in Syria, in Argentina, than you do within your own borders, where you're saying that the freedom of speech, the First Amendment, that's a roadblock to what we're trying to do. Do you see how you look on the world stage? But more than the world stage, do you understand how you're starting to look in the eyes of the people that you're supposed to govern? You are looking like the obstacle for their life and security. You're starting to look like the roadblock to prosperity. You're starting to look like the vampire who's sucking their lifeblood. And when people get fed up, as Gerald Celente says, when they lose everything, guess what happens? They lose it. We're on the cusp of America imploding at home. She will be fighting a war abroad, a war at home, if she does not get her act together. And who are we to think that she will finally become a grown-up and say, hey, let me right the wrongs before the wrongs right me? Because if she does not take the initiative to right the wrongs, right will eventually correct the wrong, and it'll bring unintended consequences to the people who were in the wrong. We're vastly approaching that major inflection point. I want to thank each and every one of you for joining me on the most powerful platform for truth anywhere on God's green earth. This is your platform for education, elevation, and edification. This is the Red Pill Diaries, and I'm your host, your brother, and your friend, Rashid. I want to say this in closing. Do right by others. Respect everybody until they show you that they're not worthy of your respect. Do right by everybody. Not because everybody's watching, but because it's the right thing to do. And push come to shove, even when no one else is watching, God Almighty is watching. And that's the one that you should be trying to please more than anybody else. Stop TikToking. Stop YouTubing, trying to put these little shorts over for people to like you. The prime objective is for God to like you. Strive to be upright in an unrighteous world. Those are my last and parting words for you and words of wisdom. And let me say, I love each and every one of you who loves truth. That's from the bottom of my heart. But know that the love that I have for you will always pale in comparison to the love that God has for you. Until we next speak again, stay strong, stay true, but above all things, stay righteous. Mama, you see, I learned those lessons. Your baby boy loves you more than life. Deuces, baby. We're out of here. Peace.